my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Michele Glass here, and we are back talking about our innate immunity or non-specific defenses. There are 7. We left off talking about 3 of the 7 last time: physical barrier, phagocyte, and immunological surveillance. So we are ready to continue that conversation today by looking at what we can collectively talk about as soluble mediators. And the big one here that we're going to be looking at is the interferon. And so you might want to just consider the interferon as one of the 7. But I'm keeping this other heading because I do want to talk about a few other chemicals. When we talk about the interferon, we're looking at essentially like a local hormone that's going to be important in signaling for the immune response or the defensive response, we can say. There are 3 important types of interferons that are released. They're released by different cells or different situations, and they're going to have different mechanisms of action. So we have first the gamma, and the gamma interferon is released by NK and T cells. So this is a bridge between both the innate and the adaptive immune response. And the gamma will stimulate macrophage. What we're going to start to see very much is an overlap in our responses. So it is important to pay attention that it's not like just one of these responses is happening at a time, but in reality, probably all of these responses are happening collectively. The next type of interferon to list is the beta, and this is released by a fibroblast. Remember, any kind of a blast cell is a making cell. It's building something. In this case, a fibroblast is building fibers. So this is very much a cell that's coming along to help repair where damage has occurred. And so what we'll see is that this will actually slow inflammation. So again, to be clear, the beta interferon is being released by the fibroblast, which is involved in repair, and it's slowing down the process of inflammation. So we're ready to repair. We need to do some reversal of our inflammation. And the last one to list is the alpha interferon. And this one is released by a viral infected cell, meaning one of your body cells that's infected by a virus. And this is going to attract or stimulate NK cells, which, remember, NK cells are our lymphocyte that is going to be important in, basically triggering apoptosis in a virally infected cell. So it makes sense that we're going to be releasing this chemical here. When we talk about soluble mediators, we can actually also include here those cytokines. We've mentioned these before, and we're going to mention them again. We can also think about this as a group of local hormones. And when we talk about local hormones, what we basically mean is we're talking to the neighborhood, right? So we're seeing a cell release this chemical into the extracellular fluid or the interstitial fluid, and it's in some way alerting or attracting or stimulating cells in that local neighborhood. That's different from a classic hormone, right, that is being released directly into the bloodstream and more widespread. We also can list in this category chemokine, and a chemokine is going to attract cells. So remember, in particular, we have white blood cells that are important in demonstrating positive chemotaxis, which means moving toward a chemical. And so the chemokine can be one of these chemicals that's released in addition to these interferons that will help to attract those white blood cells to that particular location. While interferon is listed for us in our OpenStax textbook, the 3 types of interferons are not, but they are something that you should all be aware of. The next type of innate defense to talk about is what's called the complement system. And this is not a compliment as in, oh, wow, I really like your look today. This is a complement system in terms of like it complements or helps the immune response. When we talk about the complement system, what we will see is this is a collection of proteins that are found in the plasma. And what we're going to see is essentially an enzymatic cascade that will lead to, there's 3 important things that we'll see happening with the complement system. One of those is this term called opsonization. So let me highlight this term, opsonization. Opsonization, we can say here, is going to tag a pathogen for phagocytosis. So this process of opsonization is making it easier for phagocytes to find and phagocytize the cells. I had a student years ago who talked about this process as like salt and pepper, making that pathogen tastier. And I loved that description. So Joe, thank you so much for that. It has stuck with me for years. Another thing that we'll see with the complement system is we can describe it as acting as chemotactic agents. So this term here, chemotactic, is saying this is a chemical that triggers chemotaxis. So we're very much talking about here attracting phagocytes. Remember, phagocytes are one of our innate defenses. It's our first line of cellular defense. And so very, very much remember, if you have an infection, if you have damage to your tissue, you should not expect just like one defense mechanism kicking in, but really all of them kicking in probably, and they're all working together in some sort of way to help protect the body. And the last of these that we can mention is cell lysis, where the term lysis, we should be very familiar with this. We've had it quite a lot throughout the course. Lysis is talking about break open. So here again, we're talking about basically poking holes in the membranes of those pathogens. And really, you know, once you've lost your integrity of your cell membrane, that cell is it's a goner, right? Okay, let's move on. Our next innate defense is inflammation. So we've mentioned it a little bit throughout the course, but we've not talked about like what exactly it is, how we're getting it, or the significance of it. When somebody is experiencing inflammation, you're going to see some heat, you're going to see some redness, you're going to experience pain, and also swelling of that particular tissue. So inflammation can be localized to a site of injury. It can, in some cases, be a little bit more sort of widespread. We see inflammation from an infection. So this can be triggered when you have an infection or just tissue damage. So just because you have an area of tissue that is inflamed, that does not necessarily mean that there is an infection in that particular area. What we really see happening here, the main actor is going to be the mast cell. So let's do a highlight for the mast cell to make sure, make sure we're paying attention to that one. The mast cell is going to detect the tissue damage. It's going to detect the injury. Oops. And it's going to release, we're going to see 3 important chemicals. We've talked about histamine already. We're also going to see the release of leukotrienes. We've mentioned these before. And we've mentioned prostaglandins. So we're going to see the release of all 3 of these chemicals. So let's make sure we're highlighting those in some way. I'm just outlining them in blue pen so that we pay attention to these. With histamine, what you're getting is vasodilation. So what you're doing is you're increasing blood flow to that particular area. Now let's think about this for just a minute. What is in that blood? That blood is transporting white blood cells. That blood is transporting phagocytes, right? That blood is also transporting platelets. So if we've got damage that includes a blood vessel, you know, we might want a little bit of increased movement of those platelets. Of course, in that case, we do want to be careful about blood loss. So we would see some other factors at play there. We also see the leukotriene is attracting white blood cells, specifically the neutrophil. The neutrophil is that like kind of first responder showing up. And prostaglandins are also vasodilators. And prostaglandin is detected by your pain receptors. So part of what's going on here is you're going to have an awareness that you have tissue damage. When we talk about inflammation, not only are we getting vasodilation, not only are we increasing blood flow to that area, but we also are often increasing permeability of those capillaries. So again, we're allowing really enhanced movement of those phagocytes, of those white blood cells to that particular area. This is what's causing the swelling. The increased blood flow, the increase of that heat is also, you know, to some extent can be described as a localized fever. When you're increasing heat, you are going to increase your oxygen to that tissue, but then also you're increasing the metabolism of that particular area. Okay. So really this massive increase of blood flow and this massive permeability, increase in permeability, is what's contributing to the heat, the redness, the pain, and the swelling. But really what we're doing is we're bringing all of these important defense mechanisms locally to that area to help clean up the debris and be prepared for any possible pathogen invasion, right? Let's take a look next at fever. So fever is not listed for us in the OpenStax textbook, but it is shown as an important innate defense in some other reference materials. So we do want to include this one here. We can define a fever as body temperature that is greater than 37.2 degrees Celsius, which would be 99 degrees Fahrenheit. And what we will see is the release of a chemical called a pyrogen. And let's highlight that chemical. The pyrogen is actually being released by the pathogen. So we're going to see it's released by bacteria, fungi, which can be a yeast or a mold, and it can also be released by the virus. And what this is going to do is reset your hypothalamus, temperature control center. So it's allowing for this little bit of an increase. And what we see is this low grade sort of fever, this 37.2 degrees Celsius, this 99 degrees Fahrenheit, can be good to actually inhibit pathogens. And it can increase our body metabolism, which means all of the different repair mechanisms are sped up. All of the activities of the white blood cells are sped up, right? What we'll see, this is really, really cool, a 1 degree change in body temperature gives us a 10% metabolic increase. Wow. So this slight little change just like speeds up your body tissue so much. So if you have a low grade fever, you might want to let that ride. If you have a low grade fever, you might want to let that ride, right? It's not until you start having a higher temperature for a prolonged period of time that you really need to be concerned about that, because now you're getting into denaturing your enzymes and tissue damage and cell damage that, you know, in some cases can be permanent. So it does need to be taken care of. All right, y'all, this completes our list for our 7 innate or non-specific defenses. These are mechanisms that we are born with from that first minute. These are things that are just in general protecting our body from pathogens. And what we are going to get into next is that specific immunity or adaptive immune response. So stay tuned. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.